It was one of those London afternoons where the sky looked like brushed steel and the sun pierced through just enough to make you squint. Tourists swarmed the gates of Buckingham Palace, selfie sticks waving like antennae, laughter echoing off cobblestones. YouTube vloggers shouted over each other trying to get the best thumbnail. TikTok creators rehearsed skits. Children dangled Union Jack flags from their fingers like they were waving at cartoons. Most didn't know what they were watching, only that the guards in red moved like toy soldiers and looked perfect for reels. At exactly 2 p.m., the changing of the guard began. The brass band blared. The soldiers marched with terrifying precision. Footsteps hit the pavement like gunshots in rhythm. And yet, from a group of teenagers just left of the barricade, mocking laughter. Come on, is this serious? They look like robots, man. Bet I can make one blink. They were just kids, American exchange students, judging by their loudness and matching varsity jackets. But their words cut through the ceremony like a dull blade. Private Thomas Lake stood in formation, eyes forward, barely 21, the youngest member of the Coldstream Guards on active rotation that month. Dark-skinned, wiry build, alert eyes. His chin didn't tremble, but it wanted to. His commanding officer had told him, "When the world tests your silence, make sure it hears your stillness." So he stood, rifle at shoulder, heart in his throat. His father had served, his grandfather too. He wore their pride under his skin like armor. But today he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. A drone buzzed overhead, higher than normal. The crowd was too dense, and there was a sound, a subtle, irregular thud, coming from the back of the formation, not part of the music, not part of the drill. His jaw clenched. Among the crowd, there was a man wearing a gray windbreaker, zipped up too high for the weather. He didn't film, didn't speak, didn't even look up during the ceremony. His hands never left his pockets. He stood too still. He never flinched when the brass band passed, never smiled when the guards clicked their heels in perfect sync. Private Lake's eyes scanned quickly, only for a second, just enough to clock him. The man wasn't looking at the guards. He was looking through them. From across the yard, Captain Merrick watched everything with the focus of a man who'd done 3 tours in Helmand Province and trusted his gut more than protocols. He leaned toward his comms officer. "Run a crowd scan, Zone 3 and Zone 5. Anyone static, tag them." The officer blinked. "Static?" Merrick nodded. "No one's static in a crowd unless they're watching for something." A silent tension pulsed beneath the fanfare, and all at once, the military precision that had charmed the crowd a moment before became something else. A front line. The teenager in the varsity jacket leaned forward over the railing. "Oi, soldier boy, do you ever SM dash?" His voice cut off mid-taunt, because the man in the windbreaker was suddenly moving, not forward, down, kneeling, reaching. Private Lake saw it first. He didn't move, not yet, but his lungs forgot how to breathe. In his peripheral vision, Captain Merrick shouted into his radio, "Code Iron, repeat, Code Iron, potential breach northwest quadrant." Tourists turned, some gasped, and the man. He pulled something from beneath his coat. It wasn't clear yet what it was, but it was long, black, heavy. Lake saw it glint, barrel. And that's when the training took over. No longer a soldier performing. Now, a soldier responding. Private Lake moved, not the elegant pivot of the drill, not the disciplined sidestep of formation. He broke protocol like a blade through glass. He shoved through the barricade, knocking a tourist aside with a single shout, "Down! Get down!" Gasps turned into screams. Phones dropped. Children cried. The crowd rippled outward like a stone hitting a still lake. But it was too late to run. The man in the windbreaker was now aiming. What happens in a single second? You can blink. You can die. You can save a life. Lake sprinted, rifle lowered, not to fire, but to block. He tackled the man mid-motion, knocking the weapon loose, but not before a shot fired. The sound cracked across the courtyard like thunder. Screams, scramble, silence, and then, only for a moment, stillness. 2 guards collapsed, one from impact, the other from instinct, shielding a child. The weapon skidded across the ground, landing at the foot of Captain Merrick. He picked it up. Not a fake, not a drill, a real rifle, modified, loaded, intentional. Merrick's face tightened. It wasn't random, he muttered. This was planned. Medics flooded the square. Police secured the perimeter. News crews rushed in within minutes. But the headlines wouldn't capture what mattered. Not really. They'd say, shooting attempt at Buckingham Palace foiled by a young guard. But they wouldn't tell you that Lake's hands wouldn't stop shaking for hours, that he threw up behind the barracks from shock, that his commanding officer said, "You did what every soldier hopes they're ready for, and you didn't flinch." They wouldn't tell you that the teenager who had mocked him earlier, he came back, in tears. I didn't know. I didn't know you guys were real." Lake didn't respond. He just stood. Still. Private Thomas Lake sat on the edge of a steel-frame cot inside the Wellington barracks. His uniform jacket had been removed, folded once and placed carefully on the table beside him, still marked faintly with dust and blood, not his own. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every time he blinked, he saw it again, that second, that flash of metal, the trigger pull, the recoil. His commanding officer, Captain Merrick, stood silently across from him, arms crossed. "You saved lives today, Lake." Lake didn't look up. "Sir, I broke formation." "Damn right you did." Merrick took a long breath. "And thank God for it." By nightfall, the headlines were everywhere. Terror thwarted at Buckingham Palace. Young Royal Guard breaks protocol, saves dozens. He moved before the gun did. Witnesses react. Every news anchor repeated the same phrase. In a display of courage and swift reaction, a 21-year-old guard prevented what could have been a mass tragedy. Clips circulated online, not of the gunshot, security had blocked that footage, but of Lake sprinting, breaking rank, shielding people with his own body. Some slowed it down, some looped it with dramatic music, others dubbed it a modern hero. But Lake didn't watch any of it. Her name was Ruby Patel, 7 years old. She had been clutching a stuffed unicorn when the chaos erupted. Her father, Dev Patel, had posted a photo of Lake that evening with a caption that went viral. "This man shielded my daughter without hesitation. He didn't know her, but he chose to stand between her and a bullet." Attached was a simple sentence Ruby had whispered after the medics cleared the scene. "Is he one of the good guys, Daddy?" Lake never read the post. He couldn't. But Dev's DM reached the guard's inbox. "If you ever want to meet her, just say the word. She asks about her quiet soldier every day." The next morning, the story had reached the floor of Parliament. Prime Minister, flanked by security advisors, took to the podium. "We owe an immeasurable debt to Private Thomas Lake and the Royal Guard for their vigilance and bravery." The Home Secretary promised increased funding for palace security. MPs quoted Lake's silence as a moment louder than fear. A petition began to award him the George Cross, but inside the guards' quarters, Lake wasn't thinking of medals. He was thinking of his friend, Private Jack Holden, the guard who dove over a small child during the chaos, had been hit in the shoulder by the attacker's bullet. He survived, but barely. Lake sat beside him in the military hospital, staring at his bandaged arm. "You good?" Lake asked quietly. Holden winced but smirked. "You broke the damn line, mate." "Yeah," Lake said, lips tight. "Best bloody break in history." They both laughed, a dry, fragile sound. "You know they're calling you a hero," Holden added. Lake sighed. "I didn't want to be anything." Holden turned his head. "You were what everyone needed." Back at the palace, debate swirled. In a high-level meeting, tradition clashed with modern danger. Some generals argued, guards must remain statuesque, the ceremony is sacred. Others countered, ceremony means nothing if people die. Captain Merrick, now called to testify before the Security Council, spoke with clarity. Protocol exists to protect, not to prevent protection. His words trended across social media within hours. Lake's actions were becoming a symbol far beyond the man himself, and he hated it. BBC requested an exclusive interview. Lake declined. ITV sent a crew to the barracks. He hid in the gym. When asked why he refused, he answered simply, "It's not about me." But one afternoon, he finally sat for an off-camera conversation with an ex-guardsman turned journalist named Alistair Rowe. "Why did you move?" Alistair asked. Lake paused, looked down. "Because she couldn't." Silence. Then, and what if no one had? 3 days later, a sealed letter arrived, hand-delivered to the barracks. The royal seal. Captain Merrick opened it, read silently, passed it to Lake. It said, "To Private Thomas Lake, your service reflects not only the discipline of the guard, but the compassion of this nation. Protocol may bind the body, but bravery liberates the soul. I thank you, and so does the little girl you stood for, Elizabeth R." Lake didn't cry, but he held the letter longer than anyone expected. 1 week later, the courtyard was reopened. Tourists returned. Flags waved again. The changing of the guard resumed. And among them, once again in red and bearskin black, Private Thomas Lake. He stood taller now, not because of the cameras, not because of the ceremony, but because he knew. Stillness was no longer just a rule. It was a choice, a decision, a reminder that sometimes in the loudest, most dangerous moments, silence speaks loudest of all. 2 months had passed since that day. The changing of the guard was scheduled to proceed at 11 a.m. sharp, ceremony as usual. Tourists lined up, cameras flashed, the brass band polished their instruments to perfection. But something was different. There were no rehearsed marches, no sudden orders, no synchronized stomping across the yard. Instead, a single white chair had been placed at the center of the courtyard. In it sat Ruby Patel, now 8, wearing a navy blue dress with little silver stars. Her stuffed unicorn peeked out from her backpack. Next to her stood Private Thomas Lake in full ceremonial uniform. The crowd had gathered not for tradition, but for a commemoration. A hush fell across the plaza as Captain Merrick approached the mic. Today's ceremony departs from protocol, because today we honor the man who broke it. A light ripple of applause. Not for medals, not for headlines, but for what truly matters, human life. He paused, then looked toward Lake. Private Thomas Lake's decision saved lives, and in doing so, he reminded us why this uniform exists, not just to represent discipline, but to protect dignity. Behind them, 3 royal guards marched forward slowly. One carried a folded flag, another bore a small golden plaque, the third held a velvet box. Ruby clutched her father's hand tightly. Merrick stepped aside. A low voice whispered, "You don't have to." But Ruby nodded. The mic was lowered to her height. She stepped forward on tiptoes and said, "When everyone ran away, he didn't. He ran toward me. And I think that's what heroes do." Her voice cracked just slightly. "He didn't even know my name, but now he's my favorite person in the world." There was not a dry eye in the crowd. Some guards shifted uncomfortably, wiping at the corners of their eyes with silent pride. Lake looked down, but not away. After the ceremony, Lake stood alone at the edge of the courtyard. The velvet box sat unopened in his hand. "George Cross," Merrick had told him. "Only a handful ever receive it." But Lake hadn't opened it. Ruby and her father approached. "Did you like the ceremony?" she asked, shy. "It was perfect," Lake said softly. Her father added, There's a school assembly in a few weeks. They'd love to hear from the man who saved Ruby. No pressure, but Lake smiled faintly. I'm not great with crowds. That's okay, Ruby whispered. You don't have to talk loud. Just stand there, like always. That evening, Lake returned to a rarely visited part of the barracks, the archive room. It was where every generation of guard had left something behind. Letters, uniform pieces, journals. Silence hung heavy between those old walls. He pulled out a chair, placed the velvet box on the table, and opened it. Inside lay the George Cross, shimmering beneath the dim light. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He simply reached into his coat, took out a photo, one of his platoon from basic training, and slid it into the case beside the medal. Then closed it again. At sunrise the next day, Lake stood beside a new recruit, barely 19. The boy's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his bayonet. Lake reached over without a word and gently fixed it. The boy blurted nervously, "They said you were the guy from the video, from the drill day. That true?" Lake didn't answer immediately. He just looked toward the palace gates. "Don't focus on being a statue," he finally said. "Focus on being ready." "Ready for what?" Lake turned to him. "Whatever comes next." Weeks passed. The crowds returned. They posed, they laughed, they pointed, but every now and then one would pause. Sometimes it was an old veteran with a cane, saluting quietly. Sometimes it was a parent pointing to a guard and whispering, "He's like the one who saved that little girl." Sometimes it was Ruby herself, waving with a smile no one else noticed. And in those moments, Private Thomas Lake remembered. Stillness wasn't silence. Stillness was a choice. Stillness was the legacy he had inherited and reshaped. On a misty December morning, Lake completed his final ceremonial shift at Buckingham Palace. No cameras, no headlines, just him and the stone beneath his feet. As the shift ended, he stepped off the post, removed his bearskin hat, and handed it to the incoming guard. The younger man hesitated. "You're really leaving?" Lake nodded. "Time to serve somewhere else." "Where?" Lake shrugged. "Wherever someone needs to be stood for." And with that, he walked away. Not with medals, not with applause, but with the weight of stillness behind every step. 3 months later, a tourist sitting on a bench near the gates found a laminated card tucked beneath the seat. It read, "They laughed at the drill. Then it wasn't a drill anymore. Remember, being ready doesn't always mean moving first. Sometimes it means standing your ground when it matters most. TL."